You've heard an enormous amount of material. And I have the honor of teaching death and dying to students. And I'm most impressed today by what I've heard and what people have been sharing here. It is young people who ask many questions about death and dying. And they come into the death and dying course, and I said to one student one day, "Why are you doing death and dying?" They said, "It was the only course that was available to me." That's a strange reason for doing that. But you know, there is a transformation that takes place at the end of the course on death and dying. People transform. People undergo an experience because sometimes it's the first time they have looked at their own mortality. I ask students to write their own will. I ask them to look at what their end-of-life decisions are going to be. And they're shocked by that experience. I ask them to interview someone in the death and dying industry, and they're shocked by that experience. So I think what we've got today here, when the topic on this panel is physician-assisted deliverance, I often think of the movie Deliverance, and I can't see that associated with physicians, but when Duncan was talking, he mentioned that it's a huge responsibility for physicians to have that decision. Let me just give you a few thoughts on that. First, when I go to my doctor's office, I happen to have a physician who is a friend. And we talk about, what are you going to do for me when I get into my last stages of life? And he says to me, and what are you going to do for me? We have that discussion. And I'm not saying every physician wants that discussion with you, but I'm suggesting that all of us, if we know that our physician has an important role to play with us at our end of life, we better have some discussions with our physicians. And don't just go when it says you've got 2 problems to bring to the physician's office each time. Say, my problem today is how we're going to relate to each other when I'm dying. And just say, you better put 15 or 20 minutes aside for this because it may take us a while to do it. And I think that would, let's not just accept the fact that physicians are the only people that have an input or a role in the dying process. I think we've given them that responsibility. We've given that legally. We've given them a great deal, I think, as Ruth points out, of power, but we have given them that power. And I think we need to say, let us negotiate that, and let's not put all that responsibility onto you. What do we expect from physicians? What do we demand from them? And what do we value about their role in the death and dying process? You can ask many physicians, what kind of training did you get in your death and dying experience? And most will say to you, it was by dealing with people who are dying. I didn't particularly get it formally. I didn't particularly get it through coursework. It's by having that experience. And I watched the audience when David was speaking, and there was a silence through that because I myself felt very touched by his presentation. And what was he doing? He was listening to people, teaching him about dying. So we have that whole process where we must become a partner with our caring professionals, and physicians are one of those caring professionals, about our dying process. We must talk about dying. We must be open about dying. And we must be able to accept dying. It is not a mistake to die. And I think that is what is one of the biggest issues we must face. Kubler-Ross has said, live well and you will die well. And I think that that's one of the key things. We must live every day to our fullest, and we will die well then. But what I've heard today too, and I'm sure the physician runs into this, is it's not just the individual who's negotiating that. It's the whole family system that's around the person. Our spouses, our relatives, our siblings all have an opinion about death and dying. And it seems to be that it's focused when one individual is dying. But how many of you have a death and dying discussion around the table? How many? Oh, good. There are a few people. Wonderful. It is not a bad thing. You know, I myself had this with my father when he said, I want to show you what my end-of-life decisions are. And he had it all in a 3-ring binder, and we went over it together. And I thought, that's kind of nice, because, you know, one of the things that's interesting, it took away a lot of the responsibility from me to try and figure out what I should do or what he wanted done. And I want to make sure that that's shared with his physician. So death and dying is important that we include the family, that it's a whole process. And I think what I've heard again too, there's two kinds of, there are many kinds of death and dying, but two things that come to me. One is, there is the unanticipated death, which is one form of dying, when people cannot understand what has happened, a car accident, some form of trauma. And physicians are forced into making very quick decisions about what are we going to do with this situation here and now, right now in the emergency room or in the surgery. And then there's anticipated death. And a lot of people who work with the elderly, it's more anticipated death. You have a lot of time, in many instances, to go through this process. One of our panelists in the last panel mentioned many, many years. Not only many years in terms of the death process, but in the post-grieving process as well. So let's not leave the physician alone with this. That's one of my messages. It's a team approach. It's the family members, it's the physician, it's the other caregivers, it's the other professionals who work with people who are dying, it's the people in the palliative care units, in the home care palliative programs. It's the people who work one-on-one with people who are dying. It's the people who work in nursing homes and see dying every day. And I think that one of the things we have to do is not just leave the physician out there and saying, you make this vital decision all by yourself. Let's make it a decision where we're all participating. Finally, and I'm sure that the panel has said a lot of this, be careful not to define others' lives through our own eyes. Thank you. Honor the wishes of people who are dying. And it's very difficult to do that, because I'm sure letting go, and Kubler-Ross's last stage is acceptance, is an extremely important position to reach, not only for the individual who is dying, but for the people around them. So let's be careful not to define others. Let's listen carefully. I think David Kuhl has shown how carefully he could listen and how it touched him. So I can end there and just say, all I can say is, let's not leave physicians out there on physician-assisted deliverance all by themselves. And let's hope they're open enough to ask for help when they need it as well. Thanks.